minute left.
Yeah, we have 1 more minute. Let us complete. Let us make it 7 o'clock.
I think Shaiju can start YouTube sharing. I mean YouTube streaming. Shaiju?
Yes, sir. Already shared, sir.
Already done.
Yes, streaming is on.
Please.
Okay.
Please.
It's already 7 o'clock, I suppose. Perhaps we can start now, I suppose. Already 7. Countdown.
Hi, Luke. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. Thanks.
Yeah, I think we shall start. We are already 7 o'clock. It's already 7. Good evening, friends. From India, it is good evening, and good morning from Latin America and other part of the world. This is Kejia Joseph, and the president of Globelics and editor of the journal Innovation and Development. This is my great pleasure and indeed a great privilege to welcome all of you for this 3 webinar series on Freeman Projected to the Future. Professor Carlota, Professor Soete, Professor Gabriela, Manuel, Natalia, Kejia, Chipo, and I note the presence of a number of Globelics Scientific Board members, Presidency of Globelics, editorial board members of the Journal Innovation and Development, active members of the Gras IS ORG network, Jana, Rajesh, among others. Friends of Globelics, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the opening webinar on the webinar series, Freeman Projected into the Future. As all of you are aware, this webinar series is based on a special section which is forthcoming in the journal Innovation and Development, which is going to be edited by, it is being edited by Professor Soete and Gabriela Dutrénit. The idea of this special session is essentially to understand the reflection of the young generation in terms of the relevance of the thinking of our legendary scholar, Professor Christopher Freeman. Friends, as all of you are aware, the new millennium started with a number of challenges. Building on to the globalization experience of the last decade of the previous century, the countries across the world, especially the developing countries, have been confronted with a series of issues that included, but not limited to, absence of shared prosperity that came out of the high economic growth of under globalization, and unsustainable use of natural resources, to highlight a few. The absence of inclusion or the relevance of innovation system for fostering an inclusive development and sustainable development has been high on the agenda of the scholars from the innovation system Globelics network. And we know that building on to that kind of problems, the United Nations has declared the Agenda 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals. And today, we are waging an unprecedented war against the COVID-19 pandemic. And the outcome of the war is uncertain. But we can say that the response to the unprecedented pandemic in terms of social distancing, in terms of invigorating the healthcare systems, and including the diffusion of vaccines. That is, these are quintessentially issues with significant science and technology content and technology issues. And today, in addressing these issues, the young generation of scholars from the Globelics network have been induced to reflect on the contributions of Professor Christopher Freeman. And this first webinar series is going to reflect upon the ideas of Manuel, Gonzalo, Natalia, Gras, Kejia, Chipo, Nancy, and this session will be moderated by Gabriela, Dutrénit. I take this occasion to congratulate all those who worked behind in organizing this webinar. Jana, Rajesh, of course, my presidency, and of course the editors of the journal, especially Professor Judith Sutz and Gabriela, Dutrénit. With these words, I would like to invite Professor Gabriela, Dutrénit to moderate the session and conduct the proceedings. Over to you, Professor Gabriela.
Okay, thanks a lot for the introduction. And now Judith Sutz is going to say some words.
Thank you, Gabriela. Greeting to all of you. I was commanded by Gabriela to talk about why a tribute to Chris and why with young people. Let's say that the first issue is that Freeman was a humanist, and that is perhaps the most important reason why. He was a political economist. He was a true social scientist in this sense. He was incredibly and truly interdisciplinary. For him, ethics was very important and theory was very important. He beware us of models that want to rise over theory because it is the other way around. Besides all that, we all know, we all read carefully, passionately, Chris Freeman, but why young people? I would say for one reason, and it is hope. Hope was a trademark of Chris Freeman. When I was young, when I was a militant university student, all we, in the South and in the North, we had hope. We have even certainty that a better world was in our future if we were brave enough. I have the feeling that this is not so today, precisely because of that. Hope, in Freeman's sense, is so important for the young. But the notion of hope in Freeman was not angelical, was not innocent. I would dare say that Freeman would be deeply attuned with what Antonio Gramsci used to say, pessimism of intelligence, optimism of will. This is the deep sense of hope in Freeman's sense. And I think that this is why, because of hope, that we are talking about Freeman and young people. Thank you, and ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot. So in this distribution of what we have to say, let me share with you what was the organization of this special section of innovation and development. The idea actually came from Rafi Kaplinsky, Carlota, and other organizers of the celebration of Christopher Freeman 100th birthday anniversary. And then Judith and me took the leadership in this idea of organizing this special session. The purpose was to give voice to the early careers researchers. So with this idea into our mind, we invited a set of early career researchers and also PhD students at the last stage of the research. And then many of them were proposed by the leaks. We used the Globelics networks, so there were proposals of Africa, Globelics, etc. No? But we also opened a call for contribution in research and in innovation and development. And we asked for short essays, not full papers, short essays explaining how Freeman's ideas, concept, approaches helped each author to build their own framework of thought and to better understand their object of study. We also asked for a comment of a piece of Chris Freeman, where some of his normative ideas were discussed, no? And we followed because we organized a special session within a journal, no? So we followed the procedures of innovation and development journal, and there was an evaluation process by peers, and finally 9 essays and 5 comments were accepted. They are already online and will be integrated as a special session of an issue that will appear soon. And based on this and with all this material, we decided, the organizer, the three groups organizers, Globelics, innovation and development, and also the Chris IS organization, the organizer of these webinars, we decided to organize 3 webinars that contain the presentation of the author of this special issue, 2 researchers that were very close to Chris, and then also we decided to open a space for the audience. I mean everybody that is here, which are colleagues from all over the world who met Chris, read Chris, or are close to his ideas. And then these webinars are organized not in the common way of organizing a webinar based on presentation and then discussion of the presentation. No? The idea is to combine this academic rigor with the more informal experiences of interacting with Freeman. So based on that, each of the 3 webinars contain 4 presentations by the authors of the special section of innovation and development, so young researchers or PhD students, and also 2 senior researchers were very close to Chris in terms of Chris ideas, but also they were very close in terms of the experiences that they had interacting more informally with Chris. And these are the 3 webinars that we are organizing. The first seminars start today. And then we try to have a composition, a balance between gender, region, etc., in terms of the presentation of the authors of the special session in each text. So we are going to start the first webinar, and with a first question to the authors, no? What concept, ideas or recommendations of Chris have impacted your research? So based on these general questions, we are going to start. And the order of the presentation will be first Chipo, and then Manuel, and then Kejia, and finally Natalia. And after they finish, they have 7 minutes for each presentation. We will have the two senior researchers. In this time, we have Carlota Pérez and Luke Soete, and after them, which have also 7 minutes each, and then we will open the audience to the floor to the audience to comments based on the presentation or to share experiences of interaction with Chris, etc. So based on that, we are going to start with Chipo Nancy Ngongoni. She is from Zimbabwe. She holds a PhD in industrial engineering from the Stellenbosch University in South Africa. And currently, she is research fellow under the Health System and Innovation Hub at the Stellenbosch University in South Africa. Her research and personal interests are in innovation management, complex adaptive systems, innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem, and the psychology behind creating safe, innovative spaces. So, Chipo, you have 7 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Gabriela. Welcome. Right now where I am, it's good afternoon, but good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. And as for me, as reflecting on how Freeman's work affected my PhD or my doctoral studies, because I recently completed them in January, it was more to do with looking at innovation ecosystems. So my study, to just give a brief background, was on understanding how healthcare innovation ecosystems are governed or managed. So during the process of actually doing my doctoral studies, especially at the beginning, I think we can all relate. I was a bit flustered about how am I supposed to go about it, especially with the context around innovation ecosystems and their contention that they're actually closer in a lot of other aspects to innovation systems. I was fortunate enough to actually get a fellowship, the PhD fellowship with Africalics. That's where I got really exposed at Aalborg University to the innovation systems discourse. And that really helped me a lot in terms of how I looked at how to tackle my PhD. So from there, two main aspects, which really was an aha moment for me, where when I read Freeman's work, as well as other innovation systems discourse, around how particularly history is key in explaining especially our present, and also looking at how we actually make innovation ecosystems sustainable. So I can primarily look at it in two ways, how it really affected me or influenced my research. It was firstly, theoretically, looking at how would I actually come up with a framework that guides how you would manage or look at an innovation ecosystem, especially with the current dynamics that we have with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're looking at how we can quickly collaborate and come together. And hence, looking at analyzing events or looking at how you can trace technological events as well was really central to my work. I ended up looking and analyzing or utilizing the technological innovation systems functions as the key centerpiece of my research. So I utilized those events, like the functions, to look at how would you actually analyze an innovation ecosystems, and then look at it from a complex adaptive system. So I look at how it evolves throughout the course of that ecosystem. So in a way, it also tied in empirically to how I looked at it as well, in terms of looking at cases. For example, in developing countries, we have a lot of cases where we have a lot of innovation projects that come up. And then when you have, the funders, pulling through, or maybe the funding has exceeded the time that it's supposed to be granted, then they become defunct. So we have all these knowledge pools that we have of knowledge which we don't utilize in the future. So that also is that aspect of looking at our history and seeing how it actually works to determine our future. So in that perspective, I also was fortunate enough when I was looking through cases I can look at to come across a case, a maternal health case, where one ecosystem evolved into another. So it was one project which evolved into another one. And hence I also managed to look at it from a longitudinal perspective, but not in the way that Freeman would have advised to do it, because he also highlighted how looking at things longitudinally is key in how we assess our innovation ecosystems, but also looking at how we can use other knowledge pools to explain what is currently happening. So those two main focal aspects were what really influenced, especially my framework, which I'm also still currently working on and utilizing and re-looking at it and looking at different cases of how you can actually manage, if you were an innovation intermediary, how you would govern or look at an innovation ecosystem. So for me, this is where it was really a game changer coming across the work of Christopher Freeman, as well as the whole horde of innovation systems research. And as an engineer, it was really an eye opener for me, because there are a lot of dynamics and aspects that you never consider when you're analyzing such networks. So I can say, just from a personal perspective, that's how my work was actually influenced by the work of Christopher Freeman. Thank you, Gabriela.
Sorry. Thanks a lot, Chipo. And then we are moving to Manuel Gonzalo, to the presentation of Manuel Gonzalo. Manuel Gonzalo is an Argentinian. He has a doctoral degree in economics from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. He is research professor at the National University of General Sarmiento, and also he's working at the School of Economics in the National University of Chilecito, and also collaborating with the Argentinian Commission for International Relationship. He mainly does research on innovation and entrepreneurial systems in the Global South, focusing on India, Brazil, and Argentina. So Manuel, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Gabriela, Judith, for organizing the special issue, all the Globelics community, innovation and development, Rashes, Hannah, and all the colleagues here, all the Globelics community, the LALIX community. I will try to focus in three moments or periods of the influence of Freeman in my research or in my formation as a researcher, yeah? And I could highlight one first approach or moment of contact with Freeman work, that it was mainly during my undergraduate course at University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, and also at the master level, mainly in the courses of development economics with professors, for example, Gabriel Jogel and Andres Lopez. It was a first contact with mainly the evolutionary and the neo-Schumpeterian literature in a general way, perhaps a superficial way, but it was my first contact with this literature. Then I could highlight a second moment of influence with, and it was mainly with Freeman works, that it was during my PhD in Brazil, and this was clearly under the influence of the course of the Universidad Federal of Rio de Janeiro, that the neo-Schumpeterian agenda and Freeman's work is really present there, and in particular being influenced by Redecist, José Casiolato and Elena Lastres, that Elena made her PhD with Chris. So here it was a deepening in the lecture of Freeman works. In particular, here I could highlight one book, yeah, as time goes by. This was a really critical book for me, for my PhD. I choose to make a historical research on the Indian National System of Innovation. So this book was really important to me in order to make also a blend of the neo-Schumpeterian approach with historical approach and also demand-led growth approaches. So this book is also it was also important in a course that we were giving with Jose in the University of Rio de Janeiro. So it was a second moment, and clearly with all the Globelics and Lalix community, the discussions, Freeman is, I mean, is always there, yeah. And finally, I could highlight a third moment, yeah, that it is a much more contemporary moment. That it is a moment that during this year, that this is the centenary of Chris Freeman was born. So during this period, mainly in January and February, I dedicated to read in a systematic way Freeman's work, mainly thinking in the special issue, but also in the conference that Rajesh and all the Globelics alumni organized. And during this period, I read many works of Freeman with a much more systematic way. And the final output was the contribution to the special issue. And here I would like to stress that what in the article, what I consider that are the main contributions. I think that Freeman, well, we all know Freeman, his character, but his main, for me, a main contribution of Freeman was the broadening of the discussion of technical change, moving away from the R&D focus to a much more historical, institutional, conflicted way of understanding innovation and development. So it was a contribution, both conceptual and methodological. In conceptual terms, for example, in the book with Luke Soete and Clark, they speak about new technology systems, and they make a dialogue with the Keynesian literature. This was further developed clearly by Carlota, Pérez, and Giovanni Dossi. In particular, I highlight a 1988 paper with Carlota of Freeman that they discuss, well, under the framework of the techno-economic paradigms. This paper was really interesting, that discussing with Keynesian literature, also with some monetarist approach. And finally, a third work that is the work with Lousa, yeah. As time goes by, that, well, as I said, this book is really interesting for me. And well, to end and to not to take so much time, I would like to highlight this line of research. I think that actually the neo-Schumpeterian agenda has some risk or be extremely technicality in some details. So I would like to reinforce Freeman approach in terms of have a broad approach to innovation systems, have a broad approach to development, and this dialogue initiated by Freeman, but also followed by Carlota and Giovanni Dossi, with other literature that could enrich our research, such as the Keynesian literature, such as the Marxist literature. So I would finish here, and then perhaps I will well, make some questions. Many thanks for the space. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, then Manuel, to share with us your specific ideas and feelings of what was Chris Freeman's best contribution for your work. So let's move to Kejia Shang. Yes, she is Korean. She holds a PhD at the Science Policy Research Unit of the University of Sutz, and now she is currently a visiting researcher at the Institute of Science and Development of the Chinese Academy of Science. And her general interests lie in transformative innovation, the role of innovation policy for achieving sustainable development goals, and the required organizational change and institutional change. Then, Kejia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriela. Good morning and good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm going to talk about a little bit about how I get benefited to one specific book from which I think like the most inspiring one, although, you know, maybe the other people all mention like as time goes by and the other books. So I'm going to talk about the one, The Economics of Hope. It's a very special book about a collection of essays about technical change and environmental issues and economic growth. So I came across that book when I first arrived at Peru, like my colleague just recommended to me, which he thought like, you know, it can really make us as young scholars to reflect, you know, how our, you know, world even organized in terms of economic growth and the relationship between specific technological change and economic growth and environmental issues. Because for me, although I have done, you know, researches, you know, on the science technology policy before I come to SPRU, I never really thought about, you know, how that connects with the environmental issues, or how that even, you know, how can we as young researchers to contribute our research to that kind of portfolio of work. So yeah, and my own research really get benefit of how Freeman reflecting of the techno-economic paradigms, which also developed by Carlota here. So I think his main argument is that you know, when he reflects to the book of the limits to the growth, he really arguing like when we considering of economic growth, we also have to considering the role of technological change and how we even shape the technological change towards to a desired kind of economic growth patterns. I think, and for his argument is that if we want to achieve that pattern, we have to really shape the ongoing techno-economic paradigm. And for the techno-economic paradigm, of course, we have to think about, you know, how the technological change interact with the economic paradigms, but also we also have to consider beyond economic system itself. We also have to consider, for example, the political systems and also the social systems, especially how the different systems interact together, like to shape the paradigm changes of the techno-economic paradigms. So and also the very key concepts come out from that book, I think, is about the directionality or which kind of paradigms that we want to live even in the future. And I think he was trying to argue we really have to think about, you know, like seriously about the sustainable development as a desired pattern for us to move forward. And that brings our argument, or his argument, that we have to bring, you know, the different kind of political kind of views or institutional changes together, and together with also and also together with the word kind of R&D investment, you know, we have to seriously rethink about, you know, which kind of you know, whether we can shape our R&D investment towards more environmental friendly, instead of just considering more R&D investment for the speed of innovation. So he, from his book, I really get to main concepts for my own kind of doctoral research, which I have to really think about the speed of innovation and also the directionality of innovation, and what are the relationship between the two. You know, if we want to move towards a very rapid kind of technological change, and maybe we will end up with a very less kind of environmental kind of friendly economic growth pattern. So I have to really rethink, you know, either we want to move towards to a very rapid change, or we want to move towards to more environmental friendly or economic growth, you know, or economic beneficial to the society, you know. So my own research was trying to understand, you know, how can we, you know, really move towards a very kind of more environmental friendly technological change pathway, and I was using the different concepts, you know, from the sustainability transition kind of studies, which we really have to look at how the social technical system evolves over time to contribute to, you know, like the more environmental friendly kind of growth pattern. And my own research especially concerns about how the different actors really have to interact to shape the different types of institutional changes, and especially which types of institutional changes can bring the development patterns towards more sustainable development path. So I'm looking at especially the case of China's renewable energy, which is really inspiring case if we look as a green development pattern, because we observe China really surpassed, like, for example, even the very leading countries over the last 2 decades in terms of installed capacity of renewable energy. So that really leads to the question, whether even for the developing countries or, the latecomer countries, whether it's possible for them to bring kind of green development patterns, which maybe we don't necessarily have to follow the developed countries' development patterns. So and the question is also how can we really bring that kind of development patterns forward? So my research look at the case of China, and especially looking at how the different kind of institutional changes are needed, and also which kind of political kind of or policy changes, or even kind of social changes and interact, together with the economic structures to bring that kind of future forward. So yeah, and that really also connects to the argument of Freeman's, in that book, which he was saying 2 conditions really needed for us to bring for a sustainable kind of development pattern. One is the combination of the different institutional changes, and the second is that we have to really concern about the R&D investment. We have to shape that towards more environmental friendly R&D investment. So yeah, I think Freeman's influence to me, not just inspiring how I conduct my own kind of research, which kind of research question I even ask, and also like the different concepts and the different theoretical lenses I used. But I think also as a young scholar, the most importantly, I think, is really the hope that he brought, in his book, which I think is really powerful. Especially he was arguing like, we as human, we're not just need the dismay kind of science, we also need the aspirations and the hope. And that aspiration really can bring us our desired future. So I think that's a very powerful inspiration for me as a young scholar. Yeah, so I will just stop here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Kejia, to remember us the book of the economic of hope, so it's inspired text, and also this idea of the paradigms, including science, technology, and also the institutional dimension, which is very close to the work also by Carlota Pérez. So let's move to Natalia Gras, which she is the last presenter. Natalia is Uruguayan. She holds a PhD in social science in the Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, where I work in Mexico. She is working at the academic unit of the Sectorial Commission for Scientific Research of the University of the Republic in Uruguay. She has studied various aspects of the process of knowledge production and its creative application for productive purposes, technological innovation, and also for social purposes, which is related to the innovation oriented to social inclusion. So, Natalia, please.
You are mute.
Natalia,
You are mute.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. I would like to thank Hannah and all organizers for inviting me and congratulate them for this initiative. I would also like to congratulate Gabriela Dutrénit and Judith Sutz for the special issues achieved to celebrate Christopher Freeman anniversary, showing that he is still alive in us through his ideas. I feel gratitude for the opportunity. Many thanks also to Joseph for making it possible at Innovation and Development. It is a pleasure for me to participate with all of you in this very special seminar in honor to Freeman. Thank you, Chipo, Manuel, and Kejia for your presentations. I will move on to mine because I want to hear the stories that Carlota, Pérez, and Soete have to tell us. Freeman's ideas that impact my academic work are linked to his contribution on relationship between science, technology, innovation, and development, the role of STI policies, and the innovation system approach. On the relationship between STIs and development, Freeman proposes a disruptive conceptual framework for understanding countries' economic growth and development patterns. Based on historical research, he demonstrated that it's not possible to understand the economic growth of countries and the divergence between them without considering the science, technology, economic, political, and cultural processes that take place in each specific context. In this sense, he concludes that the differential development pattern of countries depend on the evolution and coevolution between science, technology, economics, politics, and cultures. On the national innovation system approach and STI policy, long-term productivity growth depends on the introduction and diffusion of innovation. But as Freeman says, the speed of economic growth and the innovative success of firms depend not only on innovation effort, but also on the environment in which they operate. So the interaction with and influences of education system, the productive system, science and technology institutions, policy and culture are fundamental to explain innovation processes, economic growth, and patterns of development and underdevelopment. A look at the national innovation systems and the policies implemented in Latin America shows that these systems are still weak, and the gap between their productive, academic, and political structures have not been closed. Moreover, policies today predominantly follow a science push and simplistic approach to economic growth, as Freeman put it. It is no coincidence that then that the Latin America countries continue to show low economic growth compared to those of more developed countries. It remains the most unequal region in the world, with increasing level of poverty, and despite some effort in STI, it continues to have very low level of investment in R&D. The vast majority of young people are outside the tertiary education system. Innovative activities in the sector is scarce and very concentrated in the incorporation of capital goods, mostly importing and offering few opportunities for learning. Therefore, public policies should not only increase investment in R&D, but also increase and preserve the hard-won STI capabilities of the countries in the region. It is imperative to combine the different policies domains, STI, social, economic, productive, educational, health, to create a space and opportunity for learning, doing, using, interacting, and solving the problems that affect the quality of life and living conditions of millions of people in the region and the world. It is about thinking pardon, it is about thinking about the combination of policies that are necessary and feasible to imagine a world where there is a space for all and where development is human, sustainable, and inclusive. After all, as Freeman taught us, policy for science and technology must always be a mixture of realism and idealism. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Natalia, for bringing the very issues related with the National Innovation System and the STI policies related to development. And then thanks for the fourth presentation, which gave us a lot of ideas of where you were located to read Chris and to take inspiration from Chris. And now we are moving to the other side, researchers, already senior researchers. And for this day, for the first webinar, we selected two senior researchers that were very, very close to Chris. Actually, I am not going to make a presentation of Carlota, Pérez, and Luke Soete, but they are distinguished researchers who actually worked together because we read the paper writing by Luke and Carlota together, and also they worked with Chris a lot, and they were interacting with Chris over decades, and so we thought that it would be very interesting to get from them some of their experiences of interacting with Chris in the academic arena, but also in the more informal activities. No? So the question for the seniors is, could you share with us some experiences of interaction with Chris? And then we can start with Carlota, and then after Luke. So Carlota, the floor is yours.
Carlota, you're mute. You are
Okay, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you and congratulations for the issue. Congratulations to the researchers for the essays. I enjoyed them all. I think it's wonderful to see how Chris's ideas can be multiplied and enriched by the next generations. And when I wondered what to share, I sort of thought that maybe I had a privileged and unique point of view. To be the wife and collaborator is something that hardly anybody else would be able to do. So maybe because I was behind the scenes, it would be nice for me to share some of the things that I learned about how he worked, what he was like. I think one of the things that is sort of obvious to you, but that you might not have seen how much it mattered to him. It is that he gave absolute priority to the young and to the developing countries. He was naturally in favor of the downtrodden. And of course, the young are like, you know, under the power of the world and women. He also worried about the role of women. So what he did was, number one, whenever he had to choose how to use his time, go talk to some big people or go talk to young people, he would choose the latter. He would always choose to give his time to young people. But not only that, he went out of his way to make citations in his work to young researchers who had just done something. He would give great importance to lifting them. Well, with me, he was, you know, he really insisted that my ideas were my ideas, and he said it all the time, no matter, you know, being a woman, being from the third world, coming with ideas about, you know, nobody really believed it was me. They all thought it was Chris. So he kept on saying, "As Chris, but don't make so many reference to me? And I said, yes, because otherwise people won't know who really, So he did this, and he did this for everybody. He was, and also the developing world. He was constantly worried about Africa, Latin America, Asia, and helping people from those countries. He gave them a lot of time, and he kept on telling me to do the same. Whenever I had to choose between one thing or another to do, he would always privilege young people, developing countries. And that's part of his idea of hope, because he always thought that the young were the instruments of the will that Judith referred to with Gramsci. The optimism of the will was based on the fact that the young could be strong and could actually have clear ideas to shape the future. Another thing that I can tell you is his notion of structure, and how important structure for him was in terms of being able to help to explain things properly, for things to really be understood. His lectures are models of structure. His articles also, they're all, and the funny thing is that the way he did it, the way he went about it, when he had to give a talk, he would say, I have to take a walk. And he would take a long walk and then come back. And then he would write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words, sometimes just a word, sometimes a couple of words. And that was the structure of his talk. And when he got to the place, he would look at the structure, he would put it in his pocket, and then give a talk that could have been recorded and transcribed and published, because he just had this organization. His library, all the walls in the house were full of books. And when he needed to find it, he didn't have a librarian, he didn't have anything. When he needed a book, he would just go, and for about 2 minutes, he would look in a particular place and find it. Somehow in his mind, he had organized the places in the library by topic, by people. I don't know what he did, because I kept on asking him, and he said, no, I just know. And I never knew, but he did have a structure, because it never took him time. So somehow his time, his talks, his things, he thought that structure was an important thing. And finally, the written word. Very often when I had a crazy idea, I would come to Chris and I say, Chris, I think that this could be like this and that and the other and the other. And he said, I'm not answering until you write it. Oh God, I just want to have a conversation. I think when I talk, no way. He wanted it written down, because he said, when you write it, you force yourself to get the best out of yourself. And that allows me to then see if you really have a clear idea or not, and if I can really help you or not. So he really forced me each time. So structure, writing down your ideas to make sure that you understand what you're saying, favor the young, favor the developing world, all the ones that are behind, because as Natalia was emphasizing in her work, the goal of innovation is actually improving the quality of life. And of course, the ones that are weaker, the ones that are beginning, the ones that are not yet in the privileged world or in the privileged situation of having support and all these things, those are the people whose quality of life and whose, especially their assurance, to encourage people to feel sure of themselves. He did this constantly, make people feel that they were really on top of what they were doing, and that made them do so. And I experienced that myself also. So yes, it was a great privilege to have Chris as my partner. And of course, it's also a big responsibility. So I always try to live up to it, but it's not easy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Carlota. It was very interesting, your talk. As we were talking yesterday, you always say interesting things. And then particularly, I would like to highlight this field of Chris, his interest actually on developing countries and on young people, and also the recommendation for researchers in terms of the structure of the research, the structure of looking at the structure of the document, and also the importance of putting our ideas, first of all, in a piece of paper, because this helps to structure to give a structure to the research, and then we can better interact and receive feedback. So let us move now to Luke Soete, and then Luke, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gabriela. And thanks also for having invited me here. Let me first make a correction, because I think that both Kejia and some of the other young scholars referred to the editing of the journal Innovation and Development as being done by you, Gabriela, and myself. That's not the case. I think there is a person who is ignored in this all, and that's, of course, Judith, because it's edited by you and Judith Sutz. And I wanted to correct this at this stage, because, you know, as much as I would have loved to be an editor of that journal, certainly I would not have any of the knowledge which is being addressed in that journal, dealing indeed with the South and the impact of Chris Freeman on global and particularly on the developments in the South and the role of innovation in there. So this is just a correction for KJ and for the others. But let me come to some of the more personal reflections on my interactions with Chris. What I found always remarkable with Chris was his recognition or his openness to new ideas, even if they were completely stupid. And even if they were totally made very little sense. I remember in every seminar which I attended, and I was not a pupil of Chris Freeman, I was doing other things. And I'm talking now about the 70s, the 75, 76, when I was a PhD student in Sussex. And I went to these seminars and I listened. And then you had a presentation of somebody, and I found it completely ridiculous. I found it totally inconsistent. The evidence wasn't there. The data he used were more poorly represented, etc. And then came Chris with his comments on that paper. And to my astonishment, always, he started by saying how interesting this paper was and how fascinating the results were and how groundbreaking this research had been, etc. And I couldn't believe it. I was just listening to this. And then after about 5 or 10 minutes of these compliments, he then said, but, and then came the critique, which was the harshest critique I could ever imagine on a paper. And he pointed exactly to where the weaknesses were. So there was a style in Chris, which I think was pretty unique and which opened up that many people who felt less self-assured and who felt often timid in the way they wanted to make presentations, felt extremely welcomed by the way Chris immediately accepted their views and brought them into the debate. And I think this is a unique feature which I've always kept for myself, and I thought it's always one thing I have learned a lot from. That is that if you meet new ideas, and if you meet in particular young scholars who present for the first time their ideas, don't be too harsh. Be open to their way they have approached the topic, and then put, of course, the critique, which has to be there, because otherwise they will not learn and there will not be an improvement, but put it in such a way that it looks as if it is a beautiful painting, but there are some corrections which have to be made, and these corrections are pretty important to make the painting fully convincing, but it's presented as a beautiful piece of art. And I think this is, for me, has been really the way Chris has opened up each time new views and new ideas and new reflections. The second reflection I would make is, of course, that once you then became part of the team working with Chris, you had exactly the opposite. And I'm sure Carlota can witness this in a straightforward way. That is that he was incredibly critical. If you came up with your ideas, it was exactly the opposite mirror picture of what I described before. you were being hammered with clearly, but this you haven't really thought over. This is not true. This is not being proven. So in this, he was extremely tough. He was extremely tough with his friends and with the people he relied on in terms of working together. And for me, this is a very interesting lesson in terms of that, is that you have to be open to ideas, to newcomers, and particularly to early career researchers, but then take on the board that once you have sort of brought them into the learning process and brought them at your same level, you can be very critical. And you can, and it's through this critical nature of interactions that you can really make progress. So of course, Chris had lots of fantastic personal advantages and personal qualities, which I can't describe here, but you see this reflected in the way often people have said that they met a guy there who brought coffee to his secretary and all sorts of other attitudes which they found totally unique. And of course, that was also Chris. And I will always remember him in the same fashion, and exactly as Carlota said, but now here as just a researcher who worked with him in an impossible position to be able to imitate him or to be just like him in this kind of research. Thanks.
Well, thanks a lot, Luke. And you brought this idea, this point of the openness to new ideas, which are so important for the production of knowledge and for for moving the frontiers of knowledge, and also the importance of the discussion in order to having a better research, and other point that you put on the table. So the idea now is to open the floor to the colleagues that are here, that we can share with us their experiences in interaction with Chris in terms of academic interaction, personal interaction, etc. And so the floor is open for those who want to talk. We don't have all the time, but we can get, I don't know, 5, 6 interventions, and we ask for 3 minutes more or less of interventions in order to have more space for other colleagues. So I don't know who would like to start. Alex, yes, you can start.
Yes. What Luke and Carlota said, somehow I lived that experience in terms of having of Chris dedicating his time in the beginning of my PhD. For a period, he used to invite me to the refectory to have lunch, and we start talking about the breweries. My PhD was on breweries in Mexico, and about breweries, about the problems of Mexico, the development of Mexico, and all the time talking about these topics and about the culture, because I was interested in culture of but it was different, my understanding of culture of Chris when he talks about politics, economy, and science, technology, and culture. But he was very willing to give me his time for discussing my thesis. And from there, I asked him to be my examiner, and he was. Yes.
Yes, but I remember that when he was appointed as your internal examiner, and then he said, I cannot talk with you anymore about the thesis because I'm going to be the examiner. So in the last period of your PhD research, you couldn't talk with him about this. You were talking with him about many other things, but not about the thesis. This was very interesting because this was his philosophy of how to develop their activities in the academy. Okay, Manuel, do you want to talk?
Thanks, Gabriela. I would like to make a question to Carlota and Luke, given that they are here. Could it be?
Yes.
Good. Mainly I would like them to speak a little bit about what do they think about the contemporary neo-Schumpeterian or evolutionary agenda, and which are the main dialogues that we should have, and which are the vacancies that you are seeing in the discussion and in the literature. That's my question.
So, Carlota or Luke? Carlota, your phone, microphone.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, Manuel. I think one of the changes that have happened in this particular time is that now any development strategy has got to be a technology strategy. It's impossible today to think of any way of improving development, advancing even growth in these countries without thinking of a technology strategy. We cannot face the environmental problems without a technology strategy, science and technology strategy very seriously. We cannot face we can't even face inequality without a technology strategy because of the creative destruction nature of these technologies, which is going to continue. We have to, so we have a very big job of convincing policymakers, politicians, and society, of course, so that they can pressure politicians that technology is crucial, that technology is central. Not necessarily seeing it as innovation, but seeing it as, well, unless we understand innovation as the incorporation of things that may be from somewhere else, but you're incorporating them for the first time in your country, which Schumpeter seemed to call innovation too, not imitation, as Chris sometimes used to say. It was imitation, but anyway. So I think because of that, then we need to rethink our focus in innovation studies and start thinking of institutional innovation as another of our spaces of study. We are not really studying how policies change, how institutions change. I think a couple of you in your essays were talking about that. I know Natalia was talking about it, and so were you, Manuel. The whole idea that innovation isn't just the thing that is new, but it's the organization that's capable of bringing it forth, the need for collaboration, as Chip has insisted, the looking at how an institution can be transformed. Structural change is one of the most difficult things. I mean, modelers have been all making huge efforts at trying to model structural change. It's not easy at all. And I think it's because they don't have a theory. There is no theory behind it, and modelers generally want to do things in, sort of mathematically in a way, rather than understanding the human, social, political processes that are behind structural change. So I think the focus on institutional innovation is one of the theoretical big gaping holes, and the need to understand both structural change and the incorporation of technologies. And convincing the policymakers of the importance of technology as a strategic thing, and also studying countries that have applied that. Generally, although of course it depends at what moment in history you do it, but the tigers, China, all the Asians really have been very innovative organizationally, institutionally. And I think we need to understand that, to generalize and then try to find the new ways that would be adapted to our conditions.
Thanks. There are some comments in the chat, but I ask, for instance, Andrew to talk about, to let us know your comment, please, your question.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all. It's always inspiring to hear what you're saying. I wonder if we could think a little more towards the future and the immense challenges, especially around inclusive development, and if there are some specific things in Chris's thinking that you believe are really relevant to making the structural changes that would be needed to go towards a more inclusive developments along the lines of Manuel's question. Also, I think it relates to Jana's that's in the chat, but that's what it's a big question, but I wonder if you had any thinking about specific things that really are relevant for inclusive development, and maybe some of the younger researchers also have something to say about that.
And also, some of the colleagues that are in this Zoom can also give their opinion. Luke?
Yes, I'm quite happy to take on the challenge of Andrew and also the previous one. I think that if Chris would live now, and I think this is a good way to look at how neo-Schumpeterian ideas would be reflected, I think he would be astonished, I would argue, by a number of features. First, that indeed we have open science, and that when you deal with particular major challenges, which are immediate in terms of the health or the mortality, etc., and morbidity, the open science community seems to be working, at least in terms of everything what has happened. If you look specifically at the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, you can see that in terms of data sharing, research sharing, etc., something has been set in motion, and you could have arguments, and I know that people here in these connections can debate much better about this than I can, but you can have arguments to say that the science community, when it's confronted with issues which have a global impact, is pulling together and is exchanging and is cutting through all other areas of immediacy in terms of publications, exchanging the data, allowing other people to calculate, etc. And I think he would be impressed by this feature, because I would argue that this is really Harari put it very clearly, the pandemic has brought the triumph of science, the failure though of the whole political system. And this is where you can, I think that he would be astonished by the total failure at the technology side. And of course, the vaccine distribution, remember the IMF report published yesterday, and what Gita Gopinath mentioned as the chief economist of the IMF, if the chief economist of the IMF has to say that there is a dividing line in the world occurring, which is really cutting through a number of countries which are likely to recover more rapidly than what was foreseen in April, and that there are many other in the more developing country areas in the south, which will recover much more slowly because of the pandemic. I think this is quite, well, it's mind-blowing that actually the IMF is putting this forward as the claim. Remember, and I'm sure Carlota will agree with me, remember the times when we fought the Washington Consensus. We could say we join now the Washington Consensus on highlighting the extreme inequality which the COVID-19 pandemic has further brought on, not just between countries, also within countries. So the phenomenon of this pandemic is really, as some people have called it, a syndemic. It affects much more other non-communicable diseases and inequalities which exist in countries, which exist in society, which are being reinforced. And I fully agree with the comments made in the chat on there from Andrew. And this is why it is really an incredible scandal. If you look at the vaccine distribution, as also in the IMF report of yesterday, if you see this again, it is an incredible scandal. And I think Chris would be the first to say the institutions are not there. The Gavi institutions, the COVAX, etc., are not working as they are supposed to be set up. I think the world will change on this, because I think that here, this is where my argument, I have put a little paper on this, is that the climate crisis and the COVID crisis bring to the fore the immediacy of the crisis in particular groups of the population, in particular regions, and make people fear about the future, and hence might well bring up the need for new global institutional and a global institutional framework which has to become fair. I mean, this is my interpretation of economics of hope in 2021. And I think Chris would follow that line, I would argue.
Perhaps there is another intervention in relation to this or not? Yes? Bentoke, we cannot listen you.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I think what Luc said is fascinating, because can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm actually looking into the technology war between United States and China, and the much wider global consequences. So I think what Luke's presented is some counteracting tendencies, which we must hope very strongly works themselves out. Because I think the main tendency in technologies, and not least in strategic technologies like artificial intelligence, is division of the world.
Thanks a lot. Well, we have some few minutes. There is one question made, a comment made by Hannah. She said that she had several technical issues. For that reason, she is not talking. She has a question for Carlota and Natalia. If according to Chris, innovation policies are not mainly so to increase innovation, but rather to increase well-being, and provided the current situation of Latin America, where the pandemic has substantially increased poverty and affected very negatively the economic outlook and thus limits fiscal movement of the government, what would be your advice to governments with respect to public policy? At least a thought about it.
Goodness.
Well, more or less, some ideas.
I think Latin America, which is of course the continent that I am more familiar with, is in a very difficult situation. We have lost the center ground completely. We now have a lot of extremism on both ends, and the solutions are ridiculously impossible. On the one hand, it's just free markets are going to do everything, and they're still fighting this. I hear the Argentinians saying it. The other, I can't believe that after 40 years of practically not achieving anything or getting everything worse, that they're still thinking that that's possible. But of course, that's their interest, and that's one extreme. But the other extreme, there's a lot of thinking that just by forcing things and confiscating property or doing whatever, you know, some old ideas being, because people are desperate. And I really think that people are right. the whole import substitution wave, the destruction of the import substitution hope hurt very much. And then there was the big boom of the raw materials. So everybody was in a sort of boom, and then the raw materials crash also. So hopes again, twice crashed. People are desperate, people are resentful, people are feeling that they need solutions, and therefore they will follow any crazy dream, any crazy messianic leader who thinks that he can solve everything, or there aren't many she's that say so, I don't know. But anyway, the thing is, I think we have to rethink the whole situation and start trying to work something that makes sense, because the whole idea of hope is about viability. And you can't, you know, there are things like now in the advanced world, there's a lot of degrowth proposals. And actually, we can't solve the problem of inequality with degrowth. It's just, we need so much more. If we want every single home in the world to have a refrigerator, we can't stop producing refrigerators. We have to just make them environmentally sustainable. We have to make them with new materials. We have to put science and technology by the tons to solve all those problems. And we also have to be able to encourage to use things like Mariana Mazzucato's missions to get government and business to work together to solve the problems, and also making sure that taxes, regulation, all those things are proper. We need some supranational agreements. It's obvious countries on their own cannot do things. So the tasks are so enormous. And of course, there is one good thing: the horror of the pandemic and the horror of the heat and the floods and the fires and all the things that are happening that now are very difficult to deny that they have to do with climate change. These two things, the health crisis and the environmental crisis, I think are making it clear, first of all, that governments have to come back actively, which they have, of course, with the pandemic. Nobody's going to say you have to return to your old little government austerity, nothing. That's ridiculous. Nobody's going to accept that. It's obvious that business was the first to come and cry for government to be active. So governments would be active, and science and technology have to be active too, and business have to enter in the game using the science and technology that has to be developed, their own innovation, and accepting that the problems can only be solved by some decent government policy that should be super strong. Forget about all the little government and all that. Start attracting to government really competent people who are willing to make the decisions that have to be made. It's a big change that we have ahead. And whether we believe it's possible or not is where we might fall. I know that Judith always says that I am over optimistic and that I put a lovely bow on top of everything. I make a little box with a lovely bow and say that it's going to happen and that it can happen. Maybe I'm wrong. I actually believe that what I try to propose are viable things. I try to make it viable, and I think in that I follow Chris. Chris proposed very strong things, but he was always somehow trying to make it have root in reality. I try to do that. I don't know if I succeed, but I have some hope now, which I didn't have before the pandemic. I was completely distraught by the fact that the 2008 crisis did not bring a return of the state. I couldn't believe it. You know, just saving the banks and not saving the people, not putting the money through the people, which they could have done. Everything they did after 2008 was wrong. There wasn't a single thing they did that could have said was right to solve the problem. And in fact, they didn't, because growth has been dead, productivity has been low, you know, there's been nothing. And now we have this huge problem. So I don't know, but that's how I see it. I see it as an enormous transformation. And I think the conditions for the transformation to happen now because of the crises, both the environment and the health pandemic thing, could teach. But for the moment, they're still behaving horribly. So maybe I just have false hopes.
Okay, thanks a lot, Carlota. We reached the end of this webinar, but the good news is that we are going to have 3 other webinars. The next one will be the 11th of August, and then we will have the same dynamic for presented young research early careers or PhD students that are authors of the special session of Innovation and Development Journal. And then we will have 2 seniors. We will have Bentoque and also Elena Lastres. And then the third will be the 25th of August. And then we will have Jorge Katz and Slavo Radosevic as the seniors. And we will have also 4 presenters. In the case of the 25th of August will be Pavel Kori Lodla, Rhiannon Push and Hannah, and Diana Suarez and Le Chin, and again this combination between gender and region, etc. And in the case of the next session, the 11th of August, the presenters will be Betty Ann and Anex Frempon from Ghana, Jose Miguel Natera from Mexico, Sagufa from Pakistan, and Artur Moreira from Brazil. And then we will have the opportunity to continue this interaction, having the point of view and the experience of the early careers and PhD student and the ideas and inspiration that they took from Chris, and also the other side of the story, the experiences and interaction that senior researchers had with Chris Freeman in academic terms and also in more informal activities. And as we had this opportunity today, we had also based on that this opportunity to interact a little bit and to have some concerns about what is having on with the COVID crisis, but also this trying to have a more optimistic point of view related to what is happening in the future. I have to mention, I cannot mention that because Globelics is organizing 4 webinars during August, where we are going to discuss what Carlota was reflecting on, trying to think in terms of the science, technology, and innovation policies, and the challenge of COVID for the science, technology, and innovation policy. So we are going to reflect on that. It will be in Spanish and Portuguese. Sorry about that. But the idea is we are trying to, everybody, not only Globelics, but also Africa, all of us are trying to think in the future based on the experience that we had in the past and today, actually. You know? So thanks a lot for the presenters, thanks a lot for the commentator, and also thanks a lot for everybody to be here and share their point of view. So see you the 11th of August.